Friday night, June 19th. DJ Akademiks posts a clip to his Instagram story. Colorful outfit, quick spin, a pair of Dolce & Gabbana shoes he mentioned he'd been holding on to for over a year. He captioned it, "Akademiks going crazy LBS," and left it at that. No rant, no explanation, no beef attached to it. Just a noticeably slimmer version of himself, standing in frame, like the caption said, everything that needed saying. And honestly, for anyone who's been paying attention to him over the last several months, it did. He picked Drake's Plot Twist as the soundtrack.
I'm twisting it back 'cause he twisting at me, twisting that 6 in his face.
Whether that was a deliberate choice or just a vibe he was feeling that night, the song title landed perfectly against what people were seeing, because the transformation itself is the twist, not in a dramatic, made-for-TV sense, but in the quiet, slow-burning way that real physical change actually happens. He didn't announce a weight loss journey. He didn't post check-ins or gym selfies building toward a reveal. He just showed up one Friday looking the way he looks now, with a pair of shoes he'd been saving for the right moment. That detail about the shoes matters more than it seems. He bought them a year ago. They've been sitting there, which means at some point over the last year, he made a decision, not about the shoes specifically, but about himself, and just quietly followed through on it. The shoes were always going to come out eventually. He just had to get to where he needed to be first. Now, the reaction to the clip was split in a way that probably surprised nobody who follows Ak closely. Part of the audience responded with genuine acknowledgement, people who recognized the visible change and gave him his credit for it. The other part went immediately back to the Ozempic conversation, which has been trailing him for months at this point. That debate is worth getting into because it doesn't exist in a vacuum. Back in October 2025, Ak appeared on a live stream with Ad Ross, and Ross clocked the difference in his appearance midstream. He floated the Ozempic theory, which has essentially become the reflexive response anytime someone in the public eye loses a noticeable amount of weight, and Ak pushed back. He said it was working out and learning to eat better. He even threw in a line about not drinking lean like others, which got a laugh, but also made the point. Ross's audience latched onto the Ozempic angle regardless, because that's the easy narrative, and easy narratives tend to stick around, whether they're accurate or not. What was actually more telling came a few days later at ComplexCon, when DDG brought the same thing up during a sit-down. Ak didn't just deny it again. He said something that reframed the whole picture. He admitted he had breathing problems, that he was genuinely struggling at his heaviest. He questioned out loud why people attach a stigma to medication that helps someone in a dangerous health situation, which is actually a reasonable question, even if people weren't ready to engage with it seriously. That admission, the breathing problems, the acknowledgement of how bad things had gotten was the part that stuck. Because you don't say that kind of thing publicly unless it's true, and unless you want people to understand that this wasn't about aesthetics. It was about something more serious. So when the June 19th clip drops and people immediately run back to the Ozempic debate, they're skipping past what Ak himself already put on the table months earlier. He didn't owe anyone a more detailed medical explanation on top of that. The transformation happened. The health concern behind it was real. What method he used to address it is genuinely secondary to the fact that he addressed it. The comment section, though, had its own priorities. And this is where things got entertaining in a completely different direction, because a significant chunk of the conversation shifted away from health and Ozempic entirely and landed squarely on Daphne Joy. The comment section, though, had its own priorities. And this is where things got entertaining in a completely different direction, because a significant chunk of the conversation shifted away from health and Ozempic entirely and landed squarely on Daphne Joy. Akademiks recently sat down with Daphne Joy for an interview that had a specific kind of energy to it. He asked her about size requirements in dating, which is a pointed question to ask anyone, let alone in an interview setting. There was obvious chemistry in the room. Joy later appeared on Cam Newton's Funky Friday podcast and told Newton that Akademiks had given her happiness during a genuinely dark stretch in her life. Newton, apparently reading the room correctly, helped set them up on a date. That's a whole developing situation on its own. Put that against the backdrop of the fit check clip and the comments wrote themselves. Daphne Joy got him acting up, was one of the responses making the rounds. That boy getting ready for Daphne was another. These weren't malicious takes. They read more like people genuinely amused and maybe a little invested in watching something unfold. The jokes had warmth to them, and the Daphne Joy angle spreading alongside the transformation conversation made the whole moment richer and more layered than a simple before and after narrative ever could be. There's also a layer here that's harder to ignore if you know Ak's history in this space. He has never been shy about commenting on other people's appearances. It's been part of his style, the observations, the comparisons, the kind of commentary that reliably generates a reaction. There's also a layer here that's harder to ignore if you know Ak's history in this space. He has never been shy about commenting on other people's appearances. It's been part of his style. The observations, the comparisons, the kind of commentary that reliably generates a reaction. And for a long time, that same energy got reflected right back at him. The body jokes, the memes, the running bits about his size, they existed because he exists in a space where that kind of exchange is currency, and he's participated in that exchange himself. That's not a character attack. It's just an honest read of how the dynamic has played out. Which is part of why this moment lands with a specific weight. Because the critics who had the most ammunition no longer have the same angle available to them. They either acknowledge what they're seeing and move on, or they double down on something that's visibly no longer accurate. Most people, even those who don't have much warmth for Ak, chose the first option. The acknowledgement wasn't always enthusiastic, but it was there. You can tell when a crowd is adjusting its position, even if no one says so directly. The media coverage moved through it quickly. Complex ran the story, focusing on the clip and the caption. Hot New Hip Hop picked up the Daphne Joy connection alongside the transformation. The write-ups were relatively straightforward because the story itself is relatively straightforward. This isn't a controversy with sides or a beef with a resolution pending. It's a public figure looking different than he looked before, with months of context behind it and a comment section debating what that means. The coverage reflected that. Not much editorializing needed, light high, and natigue id. What the moment does for his broader presence is a more interesting question. Ak's audience has always been built on a very specific combination of access and combustion. He has real connections across hip-hop. He gets information first, and he's not afraid to say things that create problems, for himself or for whoever he's discussing. That's the formula. It works, but it also means that his public image is almost always attached to something contentious. Even when he's right about something, the conversation is usually heated. This is a rare moment where the thing he put in front of people was just himself. No angle, no information drop, no takes attached, and the response showed that his audience, even the critical portion of it, was paying closer attention to him as a person than the usual content cycle might suggest. The clip got shared and discussed because people are actually curious about him beyond the commentary machine. That's not a small thing. It means there's a version of this persona that extends past the hot takes, and Friday's clip reminded people that version exists. The Ozempic debate will likely resurface every few months, regardless of what he says, because that's just where public conversation about celebrity weight loss has settled in 2026. It's the first assumption and the hardest one to dislodge. But the debate itself is a little thinner now. He disclosed the health issues, he credited the lifestyle changes. He's been consistent in what he says about it across multiple conversations in different settings. At some point, the counter-narrative has to contend with the fact that he's been pretty transparent about the whole thing, even when transparency wasn't strictly required. And there's something worth noting about how he released this. It wasn't a sit-down interview about his health journey. It wasn't a press release or a carefully worded statement about what he's been doing and why. It was an Instagram story, the most casual, fleeting, here for 24 hours format available to him. He chose the lowest stakes vehicle possible to put out something that was clearly a high personal investment moment. That's a very deliberate kind of confidence. You don't frame a meaningful reveal in a story format unless you're comfortable enough with it that you don't need the weight of a bigger platform behind it. The shoes sitting in a box for a year waiting for him to be ready is the detail that probably deserves the most reflection. Not because it's cinematic, but because it's mundane in the way that actual discipline is mundane. Progress doesn't usually have a dramatic moment attached to it. It accumulates quietly, through choices that nobody else sees,